You're like Oz, the man behind the curtain.
I feel like I'm running a TV show. So going to, now attendees are joining. I'm playing your PowerPoint.
Can you please check if the phone number and information is correct? Yeah, the email is just, that's okay. But everything else is all right? Okay, so it's the email. Let me just-
Thanks a lot.
Good morning, everyone. This is Kim Romer, Board Chair of MSANJ. Welcome. This is the final session in our March Awareness webinar series. We're glad you could join us. Today's presentation is going to focus on staying active, and we're very fortunate to have MSANJ board member and fabulous physical therapist Joellen Fox with us. And for our second session, we have Lauren Zoloff, I hope I'm saying that correctly, to discuss ways to stay positive during these challenging times. Moderating today's session will be Margaret Novins, who has been an MSANJ community member and volunteer for several years. Thank you, Margaret.
Welcome.
So without further ado, I'm going to turn things over so we can get started. Take it away, folks.
So let me just remind everybody that this is a recorded session so that people can view it later at a more convenient time if they weren't able to attend now or as a resource. Please use the Q&A feature, the Zoom Q&A feature. If you'd like to ask questions, type them in, and at the end of the presentation, the questions will be answered. We do want to hear questions, so please type them in the Q&A. I'll also be monitoring the chat just in case somebody makes a mistake and puts it in the wrong spot. And we have two sessions today with a break between 12:15 to 12:30 will be the break. And both topics are actually something that I'm excited to participate in, the staying motivated for exercise and how to combat social isolation. I think that's everything. Joellen, I think you can start now.
Hi, my name is Joellen Fox, and I'm a physical therapist at the Dan Aaron Parkinson's Rehab Center in Center City, Philadelphia. Today's discussion is on staying motivated to exercise, and we're going to talk about how to partner up. So you're going to leave today's talk with an understanding of the barriers to exercise as well as motivators to overcome them. You're also going to develop an understanding of strategies for incorporating exercise and physical activity into your everyday life. And I'd also like to provide a list of practical recommendations by way of partnering up with either care partners, spouse, friends, family, in order to optimize your motivation and also integrate exercise and activity into daily living. But first, I wanted to share a little bit more about myself. I've been a physical therapist for 16 years, the last 13 of which have been at the Dan Aaron Parkinson's Rehab Center, which just this past November celebrated its 20th anniversary. With the Penn Movement Disorder Clinic that resides in this building at the corner of 9th and Pine, we are a certified center of excellence for the treatment of those with Parkinson's disease and Parkinsonism. And I wanted to share a little bit about our rehab team because I feel our team sets us apart. We have physical therapy, pelvic floor therapy, occupational therapy, and speech language pathology. But these are just all pieces of the multidisciplinary team approach where you are in the center of your care. So you have your rehab services. Also within our building, we have our amazing team of physicians and nurses, as well as social services. You're going to meet my dear friend and colleague, Lauren Zaloff, later on today. And also part of your interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary team approach is your unit of family and friends. Today specifically, we're going to talk about your rehab services as well as community resources. The programs which we share in our clinic are extensive. We have something called the COPE Clinic, which is a comprehensive outpatient Parkinsonism evaluation clinic, which pulls in that multidisciplinary care team. And this is for individuals living with diseases such as MSA and also PSP, CBD, and Lewy body dementia. Within this clinic, pre-COVID, we used to hold it in person. However, with COVID, one of the few positive things that have come about is the approval for therapists, PT, OT, and speech to provide telehealth services. And I will say that all of our therapists in our team can practice telehealth for those which we have a license to the state where that person resides. So all of our therapists have licenses for their specific discipline in both Pennsylvania and New Jersey. So given that this is the New Jersey branch of the MSA Coalition, you can have access to our team. Other programs which we have at our site include Rock Steady Boxing, which we'll talk a little bit about. We also have a young onset group, a super senior group, seated exercise groups, Fit Brain, cognitive class, fitness class. We even have a Parkinson's Book Nook, which is a book club for people with Parkinson's disease and Parkinsonism. We also have a Sidekicks International program, which we engaged in for the first time in 2019, bridging the youth in an urban environment with those living with Parkinsonism, and it was very, very beneficial for both parties involved. We also, through the Davis Finney Foundation, host the PD Self program, and that's about self-efficacy. We also have an annual Memorial Rehab Conference, which has been conducted virtually. However, hopefully, again, we can meet in person. So you may know a lot about these treatment programs, which are certifiable programs for physical therapists, and Rock Steady Boxing, anyone can get certified in that, although that's not a billable service within a PT or an OT's discipline. But what about these programs? There's a lot of evidence to support them, and are they applicable to MSA? While Parkinson's disease-specific treatments like LSVT-BIG and POWER and boxing have not yet been studied per se in atypical Parkinsonism, they all have potential to help when started early on in the disease course. So a little background of each. LSVT-BIG, again, you have to be certified in it, and it does require a renewal every 2 years, is a protocol-driven intervention 4 times a week for 4 weeks with daily homework. The exercises can be done supine on your back, in sitting, or in standing with progressions. So really, no matter where you are on the disease spectrum, we can modify the exercises so that they're challenging to you. Parkinson's wellness and recovery is another treatment intervention which requires one-time certification by physical or occupational therapists. And this is a great program in which you're really educating the person to bridge that mind and body disconnect and really tap into the different levels and modes of fitness in terms of exercise, relating it back to function. And we're going to talk more about modes of exercise. Rocksteady boxing, super popular and international at this point. It gives back a lot to individuals because you feel powerful. It is a group dynamic. You get a lot of motivation from others and strength from others. We in our clinic utilize it with a therapeutic hat on to really educate people on listening to their bodies, trying to power up through their bodies, and likewise, you know, stay flexible and keep the muscles really healthy. So what about exercise? I mentioned the modes of exercise. So a proper fitness program should include aerobic exercise, strengthening, flexibility, so that's your stretching, and a component of balance exercise. So let's start a bit with the aerobic. That's sustained exercise that stimulates and also strengthens the heart and the lungs, and thereby it improves our body's utilization of oxygen. So a lot of times people think with aerobic exercise, initially they jump to running or biking, but then you throw in some complications associated with MSA like orthostatic hypotension or increased fatigue or potential for increased risk of falls. And you've got to really think outside of the box. Again, it's about stimulating and strengthening the heart and lungs. Can we get that heart rate up? You breathing harder? Well, sure, and you can even do that sitting down. So the picture that I showed here is an upper body. It's called an ergometer. So you can be sitting anywhere and have this on the floor, adjust resistance, and have the ability to pedal with your legs, have the ability to pedal with your arms. The great thing, you can go forwards, you can pull backwards, you can progress this in terms of starting, say, at a low frequency of maybe 5 minutes and building up that duration and that frequency throughout the week. Brisk walking can also increase heart rate when you get those arms involved. Again, it has to be safe for that individual. And sometimes those individuals who do have balance impairment but have access to something like a pool where they can wear an aqua jog or belt that gives them some stability and flotation, you can be running in place, you can practice some big walking in the pool. And a really fun one in terms of aerobic exercise is dancing. That can absolutely get the heart rate up and sustain it. A lot of times in our clinic, I'll ask individuals how hard they're working. So you could be dancing, but if you're giving on an effort scale of 0 to 10, where 10 is extremely hard, the max of what you could do, if you're giving a 2 to a 3, it's probably not enough to be considered aerobic exercise. It may still be fun and may still be an activity, which is good, but it's not going to check that box. So often I'll ask individuals to give that subjective of how hard are you working? And we quantify, we being physical therapists, researchers, physicians, quantify moderate exercise as falling on this scale between the areas of 4 to 6. And what we consider vigorous exercise is to be more 7 to 8. So that's a person's subjective rating. We can also measure heart rate, and moderate exercise is 50 to 70% of a heart rate max, whereas vigorous exercise would be 70 to 85%. Now, what's your heart rate max? Well, that's the equation of subtracting your age from 220. So strength and flexibility, I mentioned it earlier in the aerobic exercise, that quality exercise can be performed in sitting and even in supine. So the picture below is from the LSVT BIG program. And as you can see, this individual is lying on their back. And what she's doing is actually mimicking the motor pattern of taking a forward lunge. She's lifting from the hip and bending the knee and resetting her foot, and then straightening the leg and returning to starting position. Also, too, flexibility, so important, can be done lying down, can be done in sitting, and can be done in standing. Also, we really try to educate individuals of what's your posture like when you're not exercising. So everybody right now, I want you to give yourself a posture check. How are you sitting? Are you back in your chair? Is your chest lifted? Is your chin up and your gaze forward? If it's not, bring it there, because poor posture throughout the day can lead to weakness and stiffness, and that can make it harder for your body to move. And when it's harder for that body to move, it's less motivating to move. What happens to balance? Well, balance dysfunction and postural instability are common. When we talk of balance dysfunction, it's about static, when you're sitting in place or standing in place. It's dynamic, so when you're sitting and say you're reaching for something, are you able to bring your center of mass back within your limit of stability? In terms of dynamic, it's when you're walking, okay, and on the move, how is your balance then? It's also functional. So our balance dysfunction can be seen in things like getting out of the car, getting up from a chair. Postural instability relates a bit more to our writing reactions. So say you stepped onto your grass on your lawn, and you might notice your ankles working a little bit harder. Say you step onto a mat on the floor and it slips a little bit, and whoop, your hips go out and your arms go out. That's a hip strategy. That's a writing reaction. Say somebody bumps into you and you take a step. That too is a postural reaction. Our risk factors for changes in balance and balance dysfunction and postural instability relate to aging. Here's a biggie: decreased activity. Also, changes that may occur in our walking because of disease process, like festination or shuffling steps. Also, akinetic movement, freezing of gait, if you've ever experienced feeling as though you're stuck in place. Cognitive changes as well can impact our balance. And also, decreased strength. So take away from this that it's important early on to stay as active as possible and to take care of that body and those muscles and their health. Timing of the intervention is crucial. So really early on, we're not waiting for a fall to occur. We want to see you to really educate you on the quality of your walking, perhaps the needed rest breaks that you need to have in order to promote quality walking. We also want to target safety related to your blood pressure, also related to hydration and nutrition. Research does stress early intervention as a priority. Now, let's get into some benefits of group exercise. I mentioned some of the programs which we have in our clinic. Individual activities and team group activities foster our extrinsic motivation. It encourages health and well-being. And why? Because there tends to be added enjoyment. You develop social relationships. If I can talk to when we had our Rock Steady boxing class in person, our class started at 2 o'clock, and I kid you not, starting at 1:15, people would congregate to socialize and catch up with each other. Also, too, if somebody wasn't in class, I'd always hear from others, where is so-and-so? I'd always have to give a report. And honestly, if people were planning to be out, they let me know why so I could share with the team. The really wonderful thing to hear, since COVID, we had to stop doing in-person classes, and I've heard from so many of my class individuals and members that they're reaching out to each other, not provoked by me, to just stay connected. It also facilitates commitment through fixed schedules and times when you have this sense of mutual obligation. So, you're scheduling it. You may have a busy day with other appointments, or maybe you had a poor night of sleep, but just knowing that it's scheduled and other people are counting on you to be there can be a big motivator. What also too can be a motivator is technology. Now I know technology is not for everyone, but perhaps because of this pandemic, you've become more well versed in it. But there's an app for everything, I kid you not. And sometimes getting feedback, you know, for myself, I'll give you a personal example. Knowing that I hit my goal per day of the number of steps that I want to take is incredibly important to me, especially since I do a lot of telehealth now versus being on the move and therapy in person. There's also apps that make you feel healthier by way of giving you some education and information as to the benefits after, hey, I completed, 20 minutes of balance exercise and sitting today, and oh, well, here's a little statistic for you. You can track even your food. You can rate your energy level, which I really love because a lot of times people then see the more active they were during the week, the more energy they had, and they correlate together. Obviously, we know apps can help with tracking calories, so you can even lose weight. I found a really great app that tracks how much water you drink during the day, and you input it, and then you get, the congratulations. You get some reminder dings throughout the day from the phone to tell you and remind you to take that drink. From an activity standpoint, the dings and the reminders to tell you just to move a little bit. If it's not possible for you to stand up with great ease, just move a little bit in sitting. It's really wonderful. And sometimes getting that, and when I say sometimes, I mean a lot of times, especially for those who are starting at a low activity level, these apps can be very beneficial in order to increase and maintain activity. So let's talk about some barriers because they are absolutely there. One is a lack of time. And sometimes, I say to myself and the individuals I work with, if they're retired, what do you mean you don't have time to do exercise or it takes up too much of your time? You're retired. But really, it does take up time. And I do acknowledge that and respect people's concerns about it. So really what it comes down to is identifying available time slots for you. So our occupational therapist does a fantastic job with individuals where she goes through and cues people to track their daily activities for a week and to identify at least 5 30-minute time slots, which you could use for physical activity. And then try to add that physical activity to the daily routine. And you don't start super big. It's small goals that really come to achieve a very large outcome. A simple one is just, exercise while you watch TV. Once the program ends, a lot of us stream now, so that takes out our commercials. But once the program ends, you've got to do something in sitting as you're looking for the next program. Select activities that you can do based on the time that you have. And a lot of times when we go to the barrier of fatigue, a lot of times it's about chunking exercise. So the goal may not be that you're doing 30 minutes every day. Perhaps it's that you're doing 10 minutes in the morning and 10 minutes later in the day. And that those types of exercises you're doing during those time frames are different. Take advantage of the facilities that are now opening up and available to you, or the online programs. We'll talk to those in a little bit. Again, to stay motivated and also to schedule it in. Another simple trick while you're on a phone call, try to stand, try to stretch, try to move or walk around if possible. You're on this right here with me, which is taking up your time, so I'm going to ask you, start to march in place a little bit. We can still be active and participatory in something. So lack of energy, I already alluded to it. So really, you need to address doing physical activity during times of the day when you feel more energetic, and everybody's different. A lot of times people will say the morning is better for me. Other times people say I'm too stiff in the morning and I have a hard time getting going, so more midday. Very rarely do we hear that people enjoy or feel the most energetic later in the evening. And really, sometimes we tend to avoid exercise later in the evening just for good sleep hygiene. You want to bring your body down and start getting that brain and that body ready for rest. Really, a big thing is to convince yourself to give it a chance. So a lot of times when people say, I don't have enough energy to do it, I ask them to borrow their crystal ball. Because how do you know? You haven't done it yet. Just give it a shot and see what happens. So it's all by trial. And then you bring data back. And that's where it's great to be really structured, either with an app or pen and paper with a structured schedule, working with OT and PT together to prescribe what would be best to start with. And then you get feedback. It truly is a team effort. Lack of motivation. And I really like the image in this where really we're trying to educate individuals to not think I can't, but really to think I can. And a lot of it is structure. You have great intentions and a knowledge of exercise is good for me. I know I should, but it's really hard to get started, especially if you don't have structure. You want to make it a regular part of your daily or weekly schedule. So one way to do that is write it on a calendar. Another way, or an additional way, is using an app or some type of reminder tool, or buddying up. And we're going to talk a little bit more about partnering up with someone. And then joining an exercise group or something else that's online to give a bit of variety and take it just out of you and yourself doing it alone. Now, fear of injury can be a big one, especially with those living with MSA who may have had a fall or may suffer from excessive fatigue or orthostatic hypotension. And this is really where the expertise of physical therapists comes in, to really understand and know how to exercise appropriately, considering your age, considering MSA, what your current fitness level is. And I speak to this because I have people that really engage in something that they didn't know existed. So say, for example, Dan sent a free online resource. We'll talk about it shortly. And then they do too much too soon. And then they hurt themselves. And that's not a motivator to continue. So initially, we want to start with choosing activities that minimize risk or modifying activities to minimize risk. It can be done, but again, allow the experts to help you. Other barriers include high costs and lack of facilities. So select activities that require minimal facilities or equipment. Right now, many facilities are closed, and if they've reopened, many don't feel comfortable going in. So considering walking, considering getting a low-cost piece of equipment for home. You know, you think of jump rope, which can be very difficult, but they make jump ropes now that aren't connected by the loop. So really, it's to simulate jump roping, which you can do in sitting. You can do standing still without the need to jump. You could do squats while you're circling your arms. You can just stand still. You can be supported against a wall while doing things with your arms. It's really incredible and a good form of cardiovascular exercise. So that's a way to identify inexpensive and a convenient resource. There's also resources that may be available in your community for single use or loaning. So looking to those programs and reaching out to others. Weather conditions can really impact a person's adherence to exercise, especially if they've scheduled into their calendar, hey, we're going to go on a daily walk from 10 to 11 right before lunch. And then, 3 out of the 7 days of the week, it's raining during that time. Well, have a backup. And that backup should be something you can do regardless of the weather. So perhaps it's that simulated jump rope, perhaps it's a streamed dance class that you take for 15 minutes or a yoga class, but it's possible to do. And again, it's something that should be structured. And lastly, another barrier can be social support. So if you are interested in exercise, explain your interest to your family and friends. Ask them to support your efforts. If your family and friends are watching this video, they may come to you and ask you to partake with them. And we're going to talk to that about partnering up. Plan social activities that do involve exercise, and you'll be amazed at the new friendships that you make around physical activity. So Leave this with knowing that more exercise is often a goal, but simply promoting a non-sedentary lifestyle can be beneficial. So think of the mantra, sit less, move more. Education in the optimal exercises should also begin immediately, even if you're a person who does regularly exercise. It's really important to bring in those safety aspects of the education. Also bring in the variability to ensure that you are stretching and that you do have components of balance in the work that you do. Remember, exercise is not a replacement for skilled therapy, and it does not always equal functional gains. So for example, riding a stationary bike does not necessarily improve quality of walking. Also with exercise, ample dose is needed, but really we're still understanding what that dose is, and especially with the limited research with individuals with MSA and exercise. So we're really learning from that person's body and your individual response back, that feedback that we're seeing. Ultimately, what you might have already caught on to is that behavior change may be needed. Of, you know what, it's time to start waking up at the same time, going to bed at the same time every day, and really following a calendar of activities to really create a positive lifestyle change. So it's time to get active. And we're going to talk about how we do that and partner up with what's available and out there. So we're going to talk from an exercise standpoint and an activity standpoint. So for exercise options, and this is a little plug for myself, who is pictured right here, the Parkinson's Foundation, when COVID started, began a Living Well at Home series. And on Fridays, it was designated as Fitness Fridays. Well, we have been several months, now even over a year, into COVID, and there are a lot of resources that the Parkinson's Foundation has that are now accessible any day of the week. So you can access them through the Parkinson's Foundation, or you can subscribe for free to the Parkinson's Foundation on YouTube, which has all the videos. And the reason I wanted to bring these videos up is that I really focus on those different modes of exercise in a proper fitness program, with bringing cues that are applicable to people with Parkinson's as well as Parkinsonism. And 5+ videos are all performed in sitting, even a video specifically focused on balance. And again, you may think, well, how can I practice balance if I'm sitting? A lot is about trunk control. A lot is about posture and weight shifting when we then go into those functional movements that require our balance. The American Parkinson's Disease Association has an array of exercises online, from seated exercises to yoga, Tai Chi, even interval training. There is so much on there for you to try. Dance for PD. I hope many of you have heard of this. Started with Mark Morris out of New York. It has expanded so much, and with COVID, there is so much online that's pre-recorded or free and scheduled for you to attend. It's empowering individuals to explore movement and music. It's enjoyable, it's stimulating, it can be very creative and refreshing as well. Segues into music. Music can really motivate us to get active and likewise help us push that intensity in the exercise that we're already doing. So even think back to that image of that bike that I showed you with the floor pedals and the arm pedals. So think of doing that in a very quiet room, or while the news is on. Maybe Jeopardy's on, which can be a little distracting. Now think of it with your favorite song from when you were in high school. Now think of how you would change in terms of your activity level and your effort. It can make a big difference. So we work with individuals to really make a playlist for themselves and think of what options from a technology standpoint are available. For those who are low tech, just turning on the television, most cable providers do have channels with exercises. You can access, most of the radio stations on the computer and play that out. But if a person has a phone, accessing an app, making a playlist, timing it to the motion that you're wanting from the person. So say you wouldn't want a really fast song if you were doing yoga or Tai Chi, and making that playlist unique to the person. And often we'll ask questions about music that stimulate memory. So, what was the music from your childhood? What was the first concert you saw? The last concert you saw? It's a wonderful thing to run through. Very stimulating and very motivating. So let me just motivate you here, because it's also time to move a little bit. So here's our seated group that we had, and this was a while back. However, we just turned on a song that everybody liked, and it can bring a lot of enjoyment. Okay, so even there were some individuals in there that really loathe exercise, and their care partners force them to come, saying you need to do this. And when we turn on a song they like, whoo, it's no holds bar there. People just go up and start moving. There's also a lot of online resources for yoga, so I wanted to share these with you. Teresa Conroy does an excellent job really focusing on Parkinson's disease. Specifically, however, because of her knowledge base of idiopathic Parkinson's disease, she's really well versed also in Parkinsonism, tailoring a program for strength and flexibility, for the use of the breath for relaxation, and absolutely for fall prevention. The Brian Grant Foundation has a lot of resources online with exercises geared more to people living with Parkinson's disease. However, they have a great video incorporating yoga and Pilates. And even Parkinson's UK has a wonderful seated yoga video. I really enjoyed this one. Just great commentary and instruction related to your breath. Meditation. Have you ever thought of that as being an exercise? Well, it is. An exercise of the brain, mind obviously, and it truly can impact physically your body in terms of relaxation, in terms of anxiety, and in terms of, honestly, energy. Now, it's hard to do, and it takes practice. So I encourage you, if you do suffer from anxiety or fear of falling or fatigue or decreased energy, to try it out. And to reference back to the Parkinson's Foundation, Mindfulness Mondays, which now can be accessed any day, had a great mindfulness program, and it's accessible to you for free. Now let's talk about some activity options. Reading. Partner up. I was so taken aback with one of my individuals I was working with over telehealth, because she and her husband picked a super gigantic book that they had always wanted to read, but never got to it, and set aside time during the day, and they alternated days where one would read a chapter. The next day, the other person would read a chapter. And it really came to them enjoying it. They scheduled it. It was the same time every day. This was something these two did in the evening. You can even listen to an audio book together. Why together? Well, because you buddied up, and that helps prevent you saying, oh, I just don't feel like it today. No, you've committed to it. It's on both you and your spouse's schedule, or say this is something you're doing with a family member. And then after you listen to a set bit or a couple chapters together, you have some commentary about it. And say you want to read different things with your spouse or your partner. Schedule reading time together. I have one individual that they always do it right after dinner. They enjoy it. They're digesting, but don't forget, sit with good posture. There are a lot of virtual book clubs that are happening right now, and I think it's a fantastic idea. If you don't have one near you, start one. Reach out even to the people who are joining us today on this meeting. You can really stay engaged in terms of interacting with others, and sometimes if it's difficult to get through a book, it's a great way to just participate partake in an activity with others and hear what they say about the book, and still be engaged in the story itself. Virtual tours, have you heard about these? Because there are a ton of options, from locations which have live cameras or locations which are actually doing virtual tours, such as the San Diego Zoo, Universal Studios, and so many museums. I kid you not, I checked out the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam. I've been missing traveling. The Louvre, Guggenheim, the National Museum of Natural History. All you have to do is search virtual tours online. But here are some examples if you put them in specifically. The options are endless. I can keep going on and on, but I just wanted to give you a sample schedule because all these options are great, and you may leave this meeting and think, you know what, I really want to do a virtual tour. I didn't realize that was happening. Let's do that, hon. But guess what? If you don't schedule it, more than likely you're going to forget about it. Or you may do it once, but then it may not be a regular thing which is done. So really pull out a calendar, get organized, put your activities on a schedule. And here's an example that I wanted to share going through Monday through Friday. So Monday is Mindfulness Mondays. So alternating weeks of doing word searches or card games or crosswords or something else. You know, week 1 of the month is word searches. Week 2 is this. Perhaps Tuesday is your Culinary Tuesday. You find a new recipe, create a cookbook, or start virtual cookbooks with friends. That has been a really exciting thing that we've tried to promote people and motivate them to do, but also have seen in the community and in our own families. You can even take virtual cooking classes. Artistic Wednesdays, adult coloring books, model building, clay building, working towards a project together, partnering up with your spouse, or maybe even another family member if you're doing model building. Thursdays can be your connection day. Send a handwritten letter or a card. Set up a Zoom or a FaceTime call, and perhaps during that call, you take that opportunity to march in place or correct that posture. Go through old photos, create a memory book or a journal. Friday nights always have to be fun. Hey, call it pizza and board games, but again, structure it. If you structure it, you will be more likely to do it. So I thank you so very much for your time today. I know there was a lot of information that was shared, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Joellen. That was fantastic.
Thanks, Margaret. I had a lot of information to share, and so often I think people know the importance of movement, hear it from their loved ones that they should exercise and get moving more, hear it from their physicians, and everybody has great intentions, but it really can be challenging to get started. And where I often find people really get motivated to get started is when their eyes light up and whatever I offered sparks interest. It sounds like fun. They've done it before. So really that's the good launching pad. You know, from any of those slides, if one thing really made you go, wow, never thought of that, that's where you should start. And also too, you know, to start out structuring a week where you didn't have much structure to having something every single day might be great that first week, but that might be too much. So, you know, you really want to start with those small milestones and achievements like, hey, 2 days a week, I really want to structure or schedule something in. And then you build on from there based on how it goes.
I don't see any questions in the chat. Let me just go look again.
Yeah. And, you know, on that last slide was my email address. So if anything does pop up, or if people are having difficulty navigating the chat or getting a question in, or really want to think more about the information or check out some of those websites, do reach out to me with questions that you have over email. I want to briefly talk a little bit about telehealth, because that came up in the, how to exercise safely. And I often, from previous conferences, wonderfully coordinated by the MSA Coalition, have heard, well, how can I find someone with experience, a therapist close to me? And there are challenges with that. To be in a specialty center, it's very unusual, and yet it's my everyday. But from an outreach standpoint, it's been incredible having the option of telehealth. Obviously, there are challenges. I'm not hands-on, I'm not physically there. But from an education standpoint and really talking through things, seeing the home environment, there's a lot of benefits. Still, technology is a barrier for a lot of people. So, I just met with a guy for the first time the other day, and I was looking, behind him and trying to take in his surroundings. And then, a little one ran by and I went, are you home or at someone else's house? And he said, I'm at my daughter's house, because without her, I would never be able to connect with you today. But he, got the family involved, and that can be something to help. If, initially when the thought of telehealth is like, well, I can't do it. Well, maybe ask your friends, neighbors, and family for support to really try to connect that way.
I did have a couple of questions that I came up with. First, I'd like to share. My father-in-law, he lived with us for 3 years with MSA until he passed. And one of his greatest and our greatest frustrations is that he was expected to do these therapy exercises, the voice exercises, PT and OT, but he didn't see a reward. He didn't see it to be beneficial. And it became a little bit of a power struggle that we were trying to encourage him, and he didn't have a lot of control in his life. So he was kind of using that as, no, I'm not going to do it today. And then the less he did it, the less beneficial it was. And it kind of solidified his belief that it wasn't helpful. I really wish that I understood more about what you just presented about, that I could have better explained to him that even if it's not going to meet his goal, the truth is his goal was to be able to walk safely so he could move back in with his girlfriend, his lady friend. And it just wasn't heading in that direction. So because there was no way to meet that goal, he didn't view it as important. But you made so many great points about the benefits that were there had he participated a little bit more in exercise. And if we had a better understanding, instead of it becoming a control issue, we could have tried to make it more fun. And these themes, these ideas of Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or we did try to use the power of choice, because I find that to be powerful. If he can choose, if he could choose what type of activity or what time of day. But even that, he was on to that pretty quickly, that he realized, I don't want to say I was manipulating him, but I wasn't giving him a choice. I was giving him a choice of how he did it, not if he did it. And pretty soon he stopped doing it altogether.
Figured it out. Yeah, Margaret, I think you bring up a really, really important topic, which is control. Obviously, and I can't imagine feeling so out of control with a neuroprogressive illness. And then likewise, having others tell you constantly what to do. And even those who love you dearly and are doing so out of support, it still can be received differently, and there can be resistance. So in terms of exercise, really what we've been pushing to, especially because of the pandemic, because a lot of people have declined. I mean, it's just isolation, self-isolation, changes in activity schedule, et cetera. But really talking to people about the why of exercise. And that is, people need to understand, from a posture standpoint, I'm doing this because of why, what is it doing specifically to that muscle, and what is the disease doing to that muscle? So now you're in control because you're impacting that muscle, and you're, with more power than the disease is impacting the muscle. But then we're really, really trying to link exercise to function or to an activity of enjoyment. So if it's the walking, to get back to, you know, a goal of, you know, meeting up with somebody, et cetera, then it's the, you know, people respond to objective measurements and goals. So, you know, from here to the bench outside, let's kind of get our heads around what distance that is. And, you know, it'll take 10 minutes. So every day your goal is 5 minutes that you've got it, or we're working up by 2 minutes, you know, blah, blah, blah. So really trying to hit that goal of being able to walk to the bench to meet with somebody. Et cetera. And really, I think where the control comes in, or really where the team or the camaraderie is that, you know, you're working with your exercise buddy or your cheerleader together to put together that plan. So therein kind of comes a little bit of that choice with it. But, you know, also too, that can all sound great and still not work very well. You know, there is apathy where the motivation just isn't there to do, despite having knowledge of why it's good, and, you know, just hard to get motivated to do so. And that's really where you got to throw a lot of things out to see what sparks interest, or, you know, go the route of, you know, somebody saying to the individual, you know, this is really meaningful to me. I enjoy this activity. You know, I really love this board game or cooking dinner together, and I would love it if you would participate with me, you know, and then reminiscing, you know, pulling in memories too. What was our favorite recipe when we first got married, or something like that, or when the kids were young? Oh, let's recreate it. Let's recreate our first Christmas dinner type of thing. And that's where I think, you know, the virtual cookbook and that sharing, and even, you know, I alluded in one of the slides of just connecting with the MSA community, you know, like start a virtual cookbook in this community and start sharing. And maybe that too, you know, those you're sharing with are also in your boat and, you know, can understand a little bit more and easier than we are.
That is a super point. That one thing that has come out of the pandemic is everybody is embracing more of the virtual. I shouldn't say everybody, but most people, the way they're coping is to embrace what is available virtually, especially here in the Northeast when the weather wasn't cooperating and you really couldn't get out that much, and there really weren't a lot of places to go safely. To be able to have virtual options is amazing. Hopefully that's one good thing that will be lingering from this, because to be honest, I think that for MSA caregivers and people who suffer, that to actually physically get places is quite challenging. So to have virtual options is ideal. I wish there were virtual options 3 years ago when I was looking for it. So I'm grateful in that regard. It looks like we've been instructed to not put questions in the Q&A. Maybe it's not working properly, but it says to please ask the questions in the chat. And we did have one comment that says, terrific program. Thanks so much for the many great suggestions from Frank and Barbara.
Thanks, Frank. Appreciate that. You know, people too, and I think Margaret, you brought up a great point too of not being able to, because of the pandemic or because of living with MSA, to be able to get out and about and do things. And, you know, that's where it kind of comes to trying technology and seeing if you come to that of like, well, how about I meet someone for coffee, but we're meeting virtually and we're going to have our tea time on, you know, every Sunday at noon, and each have our drink together and just shoot the you know what and talk about what's going on. Because our in-person group classes haven't restarted. 4 gentlemen from my boxing class have gotten together and they regularly meet on Zoom. They call it their guys club, and they're really enjoying each other's company that way. The virtual tours, I thought that was a pretty novel thing that came about of the pandemic, and a great, you know, way to travel that you can engage with family. Perhaps it's, you know, a granddaughter or a niece or even your neighbor that you say, hey, why don't we, you know, get together and go check out the museum in Amsterdam. So that too. And it's just trying to do an activity and get a reward back. And sometimes, you know, that reward base with the exercise of, you know, it would be an indulgence if I bought a Kindle, which would make my reading easier. But you know what? Maybe if I do a virtual book club or commit to that, then I'll get that Kindle for myself. So that can be helpful too.
There is a comment in the chat that says to please ask about safety and exercising at home with a partner. If you
Yeah. So,
can weigh
you know,
in.
yeah, biggest things with MS, with living with MSA, you know, from an exercise tolerance standpoint, is obviously blood pressure and how that can impact, you know, just how you feel and can participate. So, you know, starting, you know, if you're a person who doesn't exercise, I think starting in the chair is great and meaningful. I mean, it's amazing. Those videos that I did, every one, I broke a sweat. You can do it. You can raise your heart rate. But really, too, it's about chunking exercise. Valuable exercise does not have to be 30 minutes. It can be 5 minutes. It can be putting on one song a day and just moving to it and trying to feel the benefits of it. So, you know, if you're partnering up with your spouse who has MSA or a friend, that's what you want to look for. You know, look at breathing, look at blood pressure, be there to support and remind of those different things. Or, you know, somebody may start out exercising and standing, but, you know, tolerance comes in and it's about sitting down and taking the rest. And that's really from a physical and an occupational therapy standpoint, that's what we're looking at specifically. What is the tolerance if person really is motivated to start exercising? And maybe it's that you do have to wear compression socks, you know, when you're exercising, or an abdominal binder just to keep that blood pressure up. But you know that activity does increase blood pressure, which is also good. So, you know, just generally trying to increase those activity levels during the day. Balance is a big one, from if you're partnering up with others and together for a group activity. You know, we often in our boxing classes would have corner men. So a person who's there exercising with you is on standby, to maybe just a simple cue of make your feet a little bit wider, or touch down by having one walking stick and trekking pole in one hand as you're doing an exercise with the other arm or the rest of your body. But safety is obviously big, because if somebody loses their balance or has a moment of orthostasis and feels sick, that's not a motivator to go back and exercise. So really you want to start out in the safest way possible, but also meaningful and fun.
I want to share that this is loosely related, but I got this watch for myself. I don't know if you can see it. It's called,
Lift it up higher. Yes. Oh, that's pretty. What is that?
well, oh, the screen went away. It's called the Inspira watch, and I got it. I just did a search on the internet. I think it's Korean or Chinese or something like that, because the instructions are all in that. But I got it on Black Friday for myself, and it was regularly $79. I got it for $40, so half price on Black Friday. The reason I got it is because it actually does take blood pressure and pulse.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that it's not as accurate as a true medical device, but I really wish that I had this when we had when my father-in-law was with us, because all you do is tap on the screen and it takes the blood pressure. You don't feel it. It doesn't bother you.
Mm-hmm.
And if I had the ability to quickly assess his blood pressure and know, okay, it's time for us to sit down, or you're doing well, let's take another lap.
Mm-hmm.
It would have been really helpful to me. But the way that this has actually inspired me, it's called Inspira, is that since Christmas, I've been doing my 10,000 steps a day. And I've lost 25 pounds. And I really haven't done much more than eat healthy and walk my 10,000 steps. So it would be a nice motivator to see the graph go up, or just hold steady, or just meet your goal every day.
Yeah.
On the flip side, after I got my COVID vaccine, I was knocked out for a couple of days, and I wasn't able to meet my goal. And then that really made me sad, because I was sticking with my 10,000. But then I forgave myself. I said, well, you did the best you could. That vaccine reaction was out of your control. Just get started again.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to share with the group, because I see this as being something that could be helpful for this condition.
Yeah, I think it can be incredibly helpful for those newly diagnosed too, because therein gives obviously a motivator to exercise, biofeedback that's encouraging and motivating, and likewise gets you set with a sense of control. Like, okay, well, I am going to monitor my activity and my blood pressure and my vitals, and that'll increase my confidence versus that, fear of, well, what if my blood pressure goes down while we're outside and I don't want to risk it type of thing.
He actually hated it every time I came at him with that blood pressure cuff. It bothered him. It was uncomfortable. And this is amazing that it doesn't, again, it's a screener. I wouldn't say it's to decide whether you need to take medication or not, but
Right.
just to know what range you're in.
Absolutely. I think that's wonderful.
One more thing about safety I'll share, since I don't see any additional questions, that when a therapist first came to our home, they were shocked and astounded that we were transferring him the way we were. We had to do this rocking thing and then this lifting thing. And they're like, that's not safe, that somebody's going to fall, whether you or your father-in-law. That so I was shocked. I was all proud that we were managing as well as we were, and they pretty much shot us down and said, no, you can't do this. And so then they tried teaching us about the nose over toes and all the tricks that he needed as time went on. That just because it was working for us didn't mean it was the safest they were recommending. Right.
Yeah. And I also think too that, early on addressing how positioning is, like, how are you sitting in that chair? Even though you might be comfortable, could it be better? Well, let's try to, build it up, or maybe add an extra cushion behind you so you sit more upright, addressing it early on. Really too being, especially care partners obviously want to assist and want to take over and, and help. And often that's taking on perhaps too much of that person's weight to assist them. So they're not doing as much as they possibly could. So that's a bit of where that training comes into.
Frank and Barbara are sharing that Barbara uses a leg bicycle when seated in a chair. It's not expensive.
Yeah. So the image that I had, Barbara, thank you for bringing it up, because a lot of people, when they think of cycling, or are recommended to do a stationary bike or a recumbent bike because it's safe to get on and off, and posture is good, and it's good for blood pressure, think, well, that's an incredible expense. But those floor bikes, you can Google search Restorator. They are very inexpensive. And some of them even are motorized. And also too, under $100 at Walmart. Really the most important thing when you are doing a leg bicycle is make sure that you're in a sturdy chair that isn't going to slide backwards, and likewise that your posture is really good. There's some really interesting gadgets online. I had spoken to the jump rope that isn't connected, but really just two handles that have, little devices and things that spin on the outside. Again, can absolutely get the heart rate up. Exergaming, the Wii Fit that is out there. If you are a person who used to golf or ride bikes, or just have that ability to go on really long walks, and something you miss, it's amazing virtually what's out there, even with apps. I had one person, and this is to allude to what Barbara was just saying, whose spouse got one of the subscriptions to, and I'm not going to say specific names, but there's a lot of bikes out there that have subscriptions to push you to go, but you don't have to be on the device of that company. So she had a bike that did it, but then you could access that subscription on an app or a tablet. So for her husband, she put on, and he was using a floor bike, and he was doing a series in Maui. He wasn't on a spin bike, but he was enjoying Maui with his female trainer and having a good time. You can really get creative. That's been a big motivator for a lot of people. In the pandemic, because they miss traveling and being outside, and a lot of these subscription based, and even the biggest name one, to just have the subscription on the bike or for walking, it's only $15 a month. So it's an expense, but might be manageable for some people. I'm trying to ruminate here. There's so much to talk about with activity and exercise in general, but really it's just to get started. Margaret, you brought in something that was meaningful to you of had set goals and could see basically your exercise was right there. And that, alluding to your father-in-law, people were telling him to exercise, but he didn't see the why, and that could have been, beneficial for others who feel that way. Well, let's give you something where you can see it. And that has give back to you. But really, it's just starting the talk and staying in with the talk. And really, I can't say it enough, the buddying up in the community virtually, with people outside of your bubble even, may make you feel better virtually or if safe where you are outdoors, but it can really motivate. And perhaps I think the break was 12:15 to 12:30, but now you guys have a good 25 minutes. So, I would encourage you to maybe stand up or just start to stretch a little bit, get a bite to eat, definitely hydrate. That's so important. But I can't say enough. Thank you to you, Margaret, for moderating and bringing your personal story in. I thought that was beautiful to share. Thank you so much. And to Kim and Cindy and the MSA Coalition, thank you. March has been an amazing month in terms of what has been out there for MSA awareness. Stick with your community and be part of the community and support each other. So thank you all.
Thank you, Dr. Fox. You did a wonderful job. It was inspiring.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joellen. Thank you, Margaret. On behalf of MSA&J, Joellen, we're proud to have you as a board member, and as always, a terrific presentation. So thank you again. We'll see everybody back here at 12:30 for our next session with Lauren Zoloff. Enjoy the break. Bye.
Bye.
Should I go ahead and share my screen?
If you're ready, I just don't know if this can be an introduction by Kim or not.
Okay.
But if you want to just have it ready to go, it's up to you. Let me know if you run into an issue with the screen share. This should be okay though.
Where's my chair?
Good morning, everyone. Welcome back. We're here to kick off session 2 with Lauren Zoloff discussing impacts that this pandemic has had on our well-being and the feeling of social isolation.
Oh, the hot one?
Enjoy the session, everyone.
Great. I hope you can see my screen. Let me just make one adjustment. Are you able to see my screen?
Yep, it looks good.
Great. Okay. So then I'll get started. So hi, my name is Lauren Zalouf, and I'm a social worker at the Parkinson's Disease and Movement Disorder Center at Pennsylvania Hospital, the University of Pennsylvania Health System. Thank you so much to the MSA-NJ for the opportunity to speak with you all today. I look forward to getting into the topic of social isolation. So I will be talking about social isolation, understanding its impact, and strategies to combat it and promote connection. So I was actually drawn to this topic because prior to starting my current position at Penn in July, I was actually working at a skilled nursing facility as a social worker. And the last 4 months of my time there was during the COVID-19 pandemic. Unfortunately, when our visitation policy was restricted, I was able to see firsthand the devastating impacts of social isolation and that it had on our patients, and also just realize how important human connection is. We will first talk about the problem of social isolation itself, and then we'll go into the feelings of loneliness that it brings. And then we'll talk about the strategies on how to combat the effects of social isolation and discuss ways to help maintain forming connection with your loved ones during the pandemic. I do want to take note, though, that these strategies can also be used when the pandemic ends. So when we're in our new normal. Okay. So social isolation. According to the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, social isolation is the objective lack of or limited social contact with others. According to Santini et al., it involves having a small network of people, fewer infrequent contacts or interactions with others. So we're able to count the number of people that we have or the social contacts that we have. It's about quantity of relationships. Loneliness, on the other hand, is the perception of social isolation or the subjective feeling of being lonely. So this is an emotional state. It's the way that we feel. We might feel lonely or separated from others. And it's regardless of the amount of social contacts that you have. It's about quality of your relationships. In the Health Affairs Health Policy Brief, loneliness is described as a distressing feeling of social isolation, often described as a discrepancy between the actual and desired level of social connection that you have. Santini et al. Further describes the perceived social isolation as a shortfall in one's network functioning and social resources. This perception could involve feelings of loneliness, of absence of support, or perceived inadequacy in one's interpersonal relationships. So it's important to note that you can be in a room full of people and still feel lonely because that's your personal subjective experience. You can also be socially isolated. Maybe you live alone or you have few relationships or contacts, but not feel lonely because maybe the relationships that you have are really meaningful and you feel satisfied with your relationships. So this is an issue that not only affects, it not only affects, it really affects all of us because we all feel lonely from time to time. The issue is when loneliness becomes chronic, and that's when it can have an effect, a detrimental effect on our health. Oops. Social connections. So that's our feelings of belonging, closeness, and connectedness to others. That's what we crave as social beings. So who's impacted? Like I said, everyone. It's a human issue. As social beings, we crave connection. For the purpose of this talk, I'll be talking about it in the context of people, adults and older adults living with chronic illnesses. So risk factors. So while we all can experience social isolation and loneliness from time to time, there are certain groups of people and circumstances that can put you more at risk with an increased likelihood of becoming lonely or experiencing social isolation. So the first is age, right? There's a greater health consequence for people ages 50 plus. Having a chronic illness, disability, a sensory loss, that could be a hearing or a vision impairment, or functional limitations can also put you at risk for experiencing social isolation. Just think about it. If you have trouble getting out of your home, it might make it difficult to get out and see others. Transportation issues that could, confine you to your home and make it difficult to get out. Unemployment. So if you don't have the financial resources, it also makes it difficult to get out and meet people. Socioeconomic status, so being low income. So, not having, like I said, the financial resources can really restrict your ability to access resources. So risk factors continue. Living alone. So like I said before, living alone doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to feel lonely, but it is a risk factor because when you live alone, you tend to have infrequent contacts during the day, especially during the pandemic. A lack of social supports and low levels of socialization. So social supports, I'm thinking of not having a strong support system or people that you can count on. Feeling dissatisfied with family or social life. Exposure to domestic or community violence. So if you think about domestic violence in those situations, it's really all about power and control. That might make it difficult to be able to leave your home, or maybe you feel unsafe in your environment, and that also makes it difficult to leave your home. And then being a member of a vulnerable and marginalized group. So maybe identifying as LGBTQ+, being an immigrant, or belonging to being Black, Indigenous, or person of color. And being a part of a marginalized group, you're more likely to face issues of stigma, discrimination, and barriers to care. So social isolation and COVID-19. I thought this picture really illustrates the time that we're living in right now of kind of living behind screens and not being able to have that human contact that we all crave. So as we've learned, social isolation is already a serious issue, and COVID-19 just exacerbated it. Due to the rapid spread of the virus, we were mandated to abide by stay-at-home orders, we had to follow quarantine, social distancing, and we had to limit our physical proximity to others. I found an interesting idea. The clinical psychologist Ann Rufa explains that when we are in physical proximity to others, or in quotes, when we physically bond with loved ones, like hugging or breastfeeding, the pituitary gland releases a hormone called oxytocin, and that makes us feel calm and happy. So this physical closeness brings comfort and safety. And essentially, during COVID-19, we were forced to go against this human nature. We were forced to not have these experiences. And this has made it, I think it's made it so much more challenging that we haven't been able to be comforted by the people that bring us this comfort or spend time with those that we love. Social isolation is a public health issue. The issue of social isolation has become more prevalent today during the time of the COVID-19 pandemic. The high levels of reported social isolation, loneliness, and lack of meaningful relationships are affecting a significant number of people, we can say in the world, but we're going to focus on the US population. Given all that we know about social isolation, we can understand it as a public health issue. Because of the significant effects it has on our health, the negative consequences it has on our physical health, our cognitive and behavioral health, and our mental and emotional health. So we're going to go through each of these individually to understand all the areas that it affects, all the health outcomes. So physical health effects. Experiencing social isolation or loneliness can lead to poor sleep quality or sleep disturbance, poor cardiovascular function, impaired immunity, which is an issue because it puts you greater at risk for the COVID-19 infection, increases risk of chronic health conditions like high blood pressure, heart disease, and diabetes, and increases the risk of premature death. According to the CDC, it reports that social isolation significantly increased a person's risk of premature death from all causes, a risk that may rival those of smoking, obesity, and physical inactivity. It just shows you how significant this issue is on health. So cognitive and behavioral health effects. Experiencing social isolation and loneliness can lead to impaired executive function, accelerated cognitive decline, social withdrawal, which is the behavioral impacts, difficulty focusing, and can also encourage unhealthy behaviors like smoking, unhealthy diet, and lack of exercise. Mental and emotional health effects. So it can lead to reduced quality of life and well-being, increased risk in stress hormones, and there's an increased risk of depression, anxiety, suicide, and substance abuse. So you might be thinking, how does this relate to me? I know we're all going through the COVID-19 pandemic, but having MSA has another layer to it of social isolation that I wanted to bring up. From what I've learned from my patients and their care partners, and from talking to people who've been impacted by MSA, this can be a very isolating journey. And that's due to the rarity of MSA. You know, not a lot of people know what it is. There can be a long road till diagnosis. So maybe, you know, your disease is mistaken for Parkinson's disease for a while. And without a clear diagnosis, you might not have an identified community that you feel you connect to. Not knowing what is the cause of your symptoms or what's going on with your body can be very scary and uncertain. And because a lot of people don't know what MSA is, it puts the burden on you or your care partner to educate family members and friends. And lastly, the day-to-day management of symptoms can be a struggle. And what I mean by that is it can feel frustrating. It can also be hard to explain to others, to understand what the day-to-day management looks like, and find people who can relate to your experience, which is why it's so great that the MSA-NJ exists, so people feel like they have a community. So now we understand this is a big issue, right? And we can understand what the consequences of social isolation are. Now let's talk about the strategies to combat these effects and promote connection among loved ones. We'll discuss what we can do for ourselves, such as developing healthy routines and strategies, habits, taking care of ourselves with a self-care routine, changing our mindset, and how we find ways to engage with others in a safe and approachable way. So I thought this image was a great illustration of all the things we just talked about and what we're going to go into. So these are some signs on the left that loneliness may be affecting your well-being. So like what we mentioned, having disrupted sleep, social withdrawal, or difficulty focusing. And then this goes into how do we reduce the negative effects of social isolation? Maybe it's exercising for better mental and physical health. And Joellen just talked about how important that is for us. Maybe it's creating and sticking to a routine and scheduling it, or reaching out for social connections. So these are all the things that we're going to talk about further. Okay. Oops. So some coping strategies. Here are some coping strategies to help combat the effects of social isolation and feelings of loneliness. First, what we can do is focus on what you can control. I know we just went into control, and it's so important because everything around us feels completely out of our control. So what can we control? So we can control our news exposure, how much we, watch the news, or how much social media we're going to engage in, what we eat and how much we hydrate. That's what we can control. We can control our thoughts, positive or negative, the internal dialogue that we have going on in our mind, what we're telling ourselves. We'll talk more about this. We can control our actions, whether we actually are social distancing, whether we're being kind to others and to ourselves. We can also control our sleep habits, which all of these things can lower stress. That's the goal. What we can't control is other people's actions. We can't control how long the pandemic will last, right? So we have to focus on what we do have within our control. The other thing we're going to talk about is changing our mindset and our perspective. So, this is something we'll talk about further with the idea of cognitive behavioral therapy and CBT strategies that can help really alter our perspective in order to look at things differently so that we can feel better. We also want to focus on being present and mindful. I know this gets thrown around a lot, but it's so important and can really help us feel grounded and in tune with ourselves. So it pushes us to be present in the current moment, not to, feel worried and think ahead, which is really hard to do, and it does take time and practice. So one of the ways that we can be present and mindful is by following a gratitude practice. So that's the idea of focusing on what we do have and what we're grateful for. So maybe, it could be putting a journal next to your bedside table or on your bedside table so that at night you write down the 3 things that you're grateful for. 3 small things that happened that day. It doesn't even have to be big. Another thing that you can do is practice meditation, which I know Joellen brought up a good resource for Meditation Mondays or Mindful Mondays. The idea of being mindful is checking in with yourself, tuning in. How are you feeling today? Becoming aware of yourself and your surroundings, and tuning into those body sensations, observing your thoughts, noticing how you're feeling, and not judging those thoughts, not trying to change the way you feel, just noticing it and becoming aware of it. So meditation can happen through, maybe you do a meditation practice. Sometimes people can be kind of, I guess, worried that they're not going to be able to sit there for 30 minutes in silence. I think it's more helpful to use like an application on your phone, like Headspace or Calm, that guides you through the meditation so that you are listening to someone, guide you through it and you're not doing it on your own right away. Another thing that you can do, which I think is more approachable, is incorporating mindfulness into your daily life. So what I mean by that is taking something that you do every day and making it more mindful, adding that element of mindfulness. So let's say you drink coffee in the morning, and normally you drink it very quickly and you just move up right along with your day and you don't think about it. Instead, take a sip of that coffee, feel the warmth in your mouth, it going down your throat. What does it taste like? How is it making you feel? Just becoming mindful in that moment. Another easy way to incorporate it is if you're walking. Instead of just walking and mindlessly going through the steps, focusing on what's around you. Is there a landscape? Is there trees or buildings that caught your eye that never did before? Just kind of being more mindful as you walk. We can also develop a self-care practice. So this is, again, something that can be really small, not to overwhelm you. It's about checking in with yourself and recognizing what you need in that moment or on that day. Maybe it's a hot shower or a cup of tea or a walk. It can be small. So this is a cognitive behavioral model of social isolation. And before we go into the image, I do want to just give some background on what CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, is and how beneficial it can be for all of us. So CBT is an evidence-based practice in psychotherapy that helps people recognize unhelpful thoughts and behavioral patterns. And it challenges cognitive distortions, which are those inaccurate thoughts that we tell ourselves that reinforce negative thinking and essentially make us feel badly about ourselves. The goal is with CBT is to help regulate those emotions, challenge those thoughts, and overcome any obstacles that get in the way. This is an evidence-based practice that's used with depression and anxiety treatment. And it can be done with a therapist in a structured course, or you can adopt some strategies to fit in your life, which is what we're going to talk about. So according to Van Orden et al., which is where this model comes from, it's a great article. He says, or they say, loneliness and stress related to social isolation can be conceptualized as being caused and maintained not just by objective circumstances, but also by our thoughts, behaviors, and feelings surrounding those experiences. So when we look at the triangle on the screen, kind of look at it as a triangle. What we think affects what we feel in our body and our emotions, as well as how we act. Our feelings or our emotions affect how we think and how we act. And our actions, what we do and how we act, affects how we think and feel. So it's just showing that it's a triangular effect. It all impacts each other. What I really like about CBT is it helps us realize what we can control. We have control over our experience and how we think about it and respond to it. It pushes us to be more in tune with ourselves and challenge those maladaptive thoughts. It's all about reducing distress in the end. I'm going to give 2 examples that uses this model, hopefully that can relate to your own experience with MSA and being a care partner. I do want to first say that this model is not to minimize or invalidate your feelings. It's really just to take those maladaptive or false thoughts, or maybe thoughts that are just not serving you and are making you just feel badly, and challenging you to reframe them and thinking about it differently to feel better. So first, I'm going to give an example of someone with MSA and go through this model of how first the one way of thinking that might be, causing you distress, and then kind of shift it with this model. So for the person with MSA, the thought might be, I'm a burden on my family. And then how does that make you feel? That feeling might be guilty, ashamed, or sad. And it also might cause feelings of anxiety. You can feel it in your body. You might feel tense or your heart racing. How does that feeling then cause you to act? It might lead to a behavior like avoidance of others because you feel badly. You feel like you're being a burden. So let's apply the CBT model to try and reframe that thought. So you can ask yourself, how can I view this situation from a different perspective? So the thought might be instead, if we change our perspective, instead of being, I'm a burden on my family, it could be, my family helps me. Coming to acceptance that they want to help me. And, how does that make you feel now? I feel cared for and I feel loved. How can I change using this? If we look at the model, how can I change my body sensations to feel cared for and loved? Maybe I go and I hug my loved one. Maybe I pet my cat or dog, which brings me comfort. To address those feelings of anxiety that I was having, I'm going to do something that's calming. Maybe that's, a visualization or a meditation practice. So it's all about doing the things that change your body sensations to make you feel better and embrace that emotion of being loved and cared for. Now, how does feeling loved or cared for cause you to act? How do we change our ways to connect? Instead of avoiding our family members, let's try and be around others. Let's embrace the feeling of being cared for. Maybe it's phoning your friend or doing a Zoom call with your family. Maybe it's looking at photographs together and looking at those, remembering those good memories that you had together. So that's just an example of a way that you can change your perspective and all the action steps that you can do to embrace it. I do want to note that you can feel a burden one day, right? You can feel really down and feeling badly about that, and then more accepting of more help another day. So this model, it's just kind of encouraging you to change your perspective and realizing that you have the power in you to do that. But it's, again, not to invalidate this experience, that one day you can feel not so good and the next day you can really hone in on these skills. I also want to look at this model from a care partner's perspective. So I've heard this many times before from the care partners that I've worked with. The thought might be, I'm a bad care partner. I'm exhausted, I'm becoming impatient, and I'm losing my temper. What feeling or emotion could that bring? Maybe feeling guilty, maybe feeling ashamed or depressed. How does that feeling cause you to act? Maybe you beat yourself up. Maybe you restrict yourself from pleasurable activities. Or you could overcompensate, become that superhero, and burn yourself out. So how do we change this perspective? This is the kind of the way of thinking that doesn't make you feel good. How can we reframe that and come up with a new thought? So instead of I'm a bad care partner, we think about the top part of this, the thinking, the changing your perspective. Instead, we might think, the thought might be, this is really hard, right? I'm human and I need a break. That's our thought. Then how does that cause us to feel? Recognizing that we're human. It might bring the emotion of self-compassion, being gentle and kind with ourselves. And because we're honing in on the feeling in our body that brings us, maybe we do a self-care routine. Maybe we change our body sensations. When we think about this feeling section, we change our body sensations with a soothing activity. That could be a hot shower or a cup of tea. It could also be a visualization or meditation exercise. So doing things where we can embrace the feeling of being gentle and kind with ourselves and giving our body what it needs. Then that leads into the action. Now it's time to connect, to change our ways of connecting. Now we fed, we gave ourselves what we needed. Now we can act on that, right? Maybe we need to get out of our environment and get out of the house. We need a break. And maybe that's, connecting with others by going for a walk with a friend or a Zoom call or phone call. I think it's all about recognizing that once you feed yourself and what you need, you're then more likely to be able to go out and share that experience with others. You've refilled your cup is another way of putting it. So this is also a really great worksheet that came from this same article. It's called the Worksheet for Developing a Connections Plan. So all those things that we just talked about, if that example spoke to you or resonated with you, you can write down ways that you can change your perspective, ways I can change how my body feels, ways I can connect. Because in those moments of feeling anxious and depressed, it's really hard to motivate yourself to go ahead and just make that change. So this is a reminder of how you can do that and a way to really stick to it and hold yourself accountable. You might want to ask yourself, do I need a change in my environment? If you're noticing yourself feel anxious, maybe you need to step outside and feel the warmth, change your body sensation. Asking yourselves, what are the things that I can do that are in my control that will make me feel better? Self-care. I know we just kind of briefly went over this, but I do want to really talk about it because it's very important right now to take care of you. And this you can see this photo of kind of like the plant refilling its cup and watering itself, nurturing itself. And that's what we all need. So I think we can all relate that COVID-19 has really disrupted our routines. And right now it's all about, we can try to focus on how do we build back our structure in our daily life and our routines. So this doesn't have to be big. This can be thinking about, waking up at a good time in the morning, trying to do that regularly, the same time every day, going to bed at a good time, following your medication schedule. It can also be just not being strict with yourself, but trying to get yourself back on track. maintaining those healthy habits. So that's, having good sleep hygiene, getting those 8 hours a day, regular exercise, like Joellen talked about, how important that is for us, eating healthy foods, and drinking a lot of water. Those are things that we can do for ourselves. Maybe stimulating our brain with our cognitive health, thinking about, doing puzzles, which is an activity you can do together with your loved one, listening to music. Maybe for our mental or emotional health, a healthy habit would be taking the time for ourselves, but also if we need more help, seeking therapy. It's definitely important to recognize when you need help. And then having a compassionate attitude. So this was going back, I actually used this idea in that care partner example, which when we have a compassionate attitude towards ourselves, that's all about really giving yourself a break. Don't be so hard on yourself. Recognizing that no one is perfect, and acknowledging how you're feeling is okay. You might feel one way one day and feel better the next day. It's been a very stressful time on all of us, and just being able to recognize that it's okay to feel this way. It's valid. According to Vahia et al., enhancing compassion may reduce loneliness and promote greater well-being. So compassion is key. So these are just some examples of types of self-care that you can incorporate in your life. Just gives you some great examples. So that would be for your physical, emotional, social, and spiritual needs. So physical could be, and these are some examples that we reviewed already, sleep, stretching, walking, having a physical release, maybe with exercise. Is it maybe emotional self-care that you need with stress management, emotional maturity or regulation, forgiving yourself? Your social self-care might be maintaining boundaries, knowing when you have to say no, or you can't do something right now. You have to, maintain your boundaries. Maybe it's engaging your support system. Positive social media, like we talked about, you can control how much exposure to social media. I mean, it's hard right now because we're all on the screen and technology is we're embracing. But in terms of social media, that's maybe negative or where you compare yourself, not making you feel good, we can restrict that. And then spiritual needs, that could be time alone. Sometimes we need time to ourselves and not with others. Maybe it's meditation or yoga. So these give you a lot of good ideas. And what you do depends on the day. It depends on what you need that day. And like I said before, if we take care of ourselves, we may start to feel better and be more open to reaching out to others. So staying engaged and socially connected. So right now we've all learned how to do that over technology, or we've been forced at least to do that over technology. And just kind of, we have learned that we have to be creative, right? We have to connect and be creative. So maybe we join a support group online, or we work to exercise regularly. And Joellen gave us a lot of great ideas on that. It could either be with your care partner or your family member on your own in your home, or maybe it's joining an online support or online exercise class. You could join a religious or spiritual group online. There are so many options. You can check in on others and phone a friend to see, showing that you care about them. You can Zoom and FaceTime with family and friends, which I know we've been doing a lot of probably these days, if you have access. It's all about reaching out and staying in touch with the use of technology. And this isn't a big one. Joellen talked about how important it is to schedule things in your calendar, and I completely agree. We can plan virtual gatherings. We can plan times to engage maybe, by cooking a meal together, eating dinner over Zoom, drinking over Zoom. It could be laughing together and having that release as a family. I think when you schedule it, it gives you something to look forward to. This photo really makes me feel calm, having, connecting to nature. And I think that's another great thing that we can do. It's around us. We can get outside. So maybe that's taking a walk. It could be sitting on the porch, taking your dog for a walk. I do acknowledge that as a care partner, it might be hard to do this. So at least something that you could do for yourself is open the blinds, let that sunlight in. Or maybe it's opening the window and letting the fresh breeze come in. It could just make you feel just, connected with nature. If you feel motivated, you could discover a new hobby, or you could do a puzzle with someone that you love, or with your loved one. You could do arts and crafts or a game, something that's really engaging. Engage with pets. I brought that up before, is just pets can really bring a sense of comfort and are fun to play with. Random acts of kindness for others. I really like this idea. Maybe you can write a letter, mail a postcard to someone who you know is struggling, or a family member or friend. Or maybe you can leave a gift, or you could leave a treat on someone's doorstep just to show that you're thinking of them and that you care about them. So looking ahead, I want to give you all a message of hope. Things are getting better. Spring is here. It's getting lighter at the end of the day. There are more opportunities to spend time outside with loved ones at a distance. But we can now really get out of this dark coldness and enjoy the weather. Vaccinations continue, right? The light is at the end of the tunnel is near. So more and more people are getting vaccinated. And we will eventually, we're going to continue learning to adapt and understand what our new normal looks like. And again, pandemic or not, these strategies can be added to your toolkit to help build resilience, manage your stress levels, and help to combat the effects of social isolation and loneliness. It's just a reminder to continue practicing self-care strategies or routines and utilizing strategies for staying engaged and socially connected. So these are all things that can continue beyond the pandemic. Okay. So I did put together some slides of resources so that you can go back and look at these. These slides will be shared with you, so not to worry about writing everything down. So if you're looking for care in the community, I always recommend for my families, if they're interested in learning about what's available to them around them, is looking at your local area agency on aging. And so there's actually an area agency on aging in every county in the country. In Pennsylvania and New Jersey, these are the links to find what your county office on aging is. Even if you're not 60 plus, it's still a good resource for you because it's just learning about what's available. And they have a lot of great resources like transportation resources or in-home care. So lots of things that you can check out. You can also find home health services, care facilities and hospice care on Medicare.gov. That's another resource that I even utilize all the time when I'm looking for care for families. So you can plug in your zip code and look what's available in your area. And then the National Hospice and Palliative Care Organization. You can learn more about what palliative care and hospice is and about the agencies available. So support groups. I talked about that you should attend a support group. So what groups are available? And these groups are all to make you feel connected, that you have a community to share with, and know that you're not alone. So I actually facilitate a group with Penn's Parkinson's Disease and Movement Disorder Center for people with an atypical Parkinsonism and their care partners, and that includes MSA. This is a monthly virtual meeting. If you're interested, you can feel free to contact me by email, and I can send you information about our upcoming groups. I also included on here Cure PSP, which has also information and resources for people with MSA and their care partners, as well as online groups. And here's the listing. The link is there. The MSA Coalition has also a list of support meetings, as well as the MSA NJ. So here's where you can look those up. So resources on mental health. We talked about mental health a lot, and I want to make sure you know where you can go for support if you needed it. In the event of a medical emergency or urgent crisis, if you feel you're in immediate danger, call 911. But these are numbers for national and local crisis response hotlines. So for suicide prevention hotline, the disaster distress hotline, which was actually a designated hotline for emotional distress due to the traumatic events such as COVID-19. We also have the National Domestic Violence Hotline. So these are all resources for you. So mental health resources continued. So like Office on Aging, there's also mental health crisis hotlines by county, or separated by county is what I mean. So in Pennsylvania and New Jersey, there's a hotline, a number you can call if if you are or your loved one's ever in a mental health emergency. And so that's separated by Pennsylvania and New Jersey, which you can also look up. I also included on here how to find a therapist if you felt like you needed more support for your mental health. You can either call the number in the back of your insurance card, it could be like member services, and you can call and ask to locate a list or ask for a list of in-network providers. You can also look on Psychology Today. You really like the idea of CBT. They have psychologists and social workers and different like counselors that provide CBT. And you can also check off your zip code and like the issues that you're struggling with in your insurance. It's a good resource. You want to learn more about CBT, I also included some on here. Here are my references in case you want to learn more all about social isolation and loneliness. And lastly, if anyone has any questions, I did put together some discussion questions, kind of just things to think about, and maybe even if you don't feel comfortable answering, things to think about for time to reflect. How have you been impacted by social isolation during the pandemic? What strategies have been helpful for you to stay engaged and socially connected with others? What new coping strategies or healthy habits will you try to integrate from here on? And how will you hold yourself accountable to carry these out? Maybe you'll use the connections plan on the slide. Maybe you'll write it down or build, buddy up with a friend like Jo Ellen said. All these things that you can try to do to maintain those healthy habits. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lauren. That was fantastic.
Thank you. I can stop sharing my screen. Okay.
I don't see any questions in the chat or in the Q&A. The presentation you provided, though, was extremely helpful.
Great, I'm really glad.
I'm not sure where to go from here, though.
So I actually do have a question. So it says, can you talk a little bit about the anxiety people may be feeling about returning to normal in society in general? It's a really good point. I think it's just to kind of bring back to the point of normal, it's all normal to feel anxious about returning to, we don't know what this is going to look like, right? And I think each and every day we're learning a little bit more about more people getting vaccinated, things maybe loosening up with restrictions. But I think it's really normal to feel anxious, and because it's a time of uncertainty. So I think it's just validating that it's normal to feel anxious. I think it's helpful. Sometimes it can be helpful to plan into the future or look into the future, but it can also be really distressing. And sometimes it can just be helpful to focus on right now, right? In this moment, in this present moment, what I can control, going back to that, as not to overwhelm yourself, because we don't know what tomorrow might look like or next week might look like. So going back with being present and mindful.
That applies to many areas of
Totally.
our lives in general, even unrelated to MSA, that I can say that everyone's lives got turned upside down during this, and sometimes just focusing on the here and the now is better than being overwhelmed by the whole situation.
Definitely.
Oh,
And
wait, I have a question in here.
Sure.
Oh, it says, please ask your questions here in the chat.
And you just made me, think back to when I work with families, because like I mentioned, I'm a social worker at the Parkinson's Disease Movement Disorder Center. And a lot of the time I have patients or care partners ask me, how much should I be planning ahead? Should I start to think about my loved one's care needs and if they're going to need in-home care or a facility placement. And they might have just been diagnosed, or, they might not be there yet at all. And it's helpful. It can be helpful to know what your options are, but I also think, like you're saying, it can be really overwhelming. Another good way to think about it is, maybe start to look at your options, but not to overwhelm yourself. And then you can always reassess your needs as time goes on.
Then there are other things that you essentially have to think ahead and plan for
Sure.
example, power outages. That if you're using equipment that needs power, you have to have some kind of a backup plan, either of how to get power or what you'll do if you do lose power. I remember being afraid for big storms coming through. We didn't have a backup plan. Luckily our bed had a crank and our lift was, we could charge in advance. But what really impacted my father-in-law, if we lost power, was the lack of a television, because that was basically how he occupied his time and enjoyed. And it was, I don't want to say it's his life, but eventually that TV was on pretty much 24/7, and it was kind of a companion for him, I guess.
Yeah, brought him joy. That's great.
We had about a 3-hour power outage, and it was driving him crazy.
Wow.
We were talking to him, we were trying to engage him and entertain, and he just kept saying, when's the power going to go back on? But for example, those are things that you have to think through. And
Sure, you have to have a backup plan.
Yeah, it's the backup plan.
It's the same thing if you're a care partner and you care for someone, you want to make sure that if anything, God forbid, happened to you, that you had a plan of, who would care for your spouse or your family member. So it's the same idea of knowing what you're going to do and having a toolkit.
Exactly.
Any other questions?
There aren't any.
And
questions.
if not, like I said, I think those discussion questions at the end can really help you think about, how does this topic, social isolation, relate to me, and how can I work through it?
Thank you so much, Lauren.
Thank you.
Great having you here.
So one thing came in. Yeah, so
Access to that, I guess, because
that's okay. It came directly to me.
Oh, okay.
So the idea of that, there is an additional burden on, family members or care partners during the pandemic because, in a time of an emergency, or, because, like, let's say, because we have to be quarantined in our home, it puts the burden on the care partner to provide all the care. I know that a lot of families are making really difficult choices of the balance, when to bring in outside caregivers, for example, and, having to consider, might this be detrimental to our health or be at, kind of pose a risk, but at the same time, is it giving me a break? Is it helping my spouse? It's kind of like the idea of having to outweigh the risks and the benefits of bringing in outside care. But it is putting a lot of the onus on the care partner to do kind of, like you mentioned before, to entertain. Like if there was a power outage, you have to be the one to entertain. And it does put a lot of the pressure on the care partner, which is why I think it can be helpful to come up with what are some other activities that we can think of that we can do. Or, maybe it's putting on a Zoom call with the grandkids to keep you busy. So I think it's kind of trying to be creative of how to stay engaged, so that the pressure is not just on the care partner to keep that person entertained. Another thing came in. Let's see. Okay, so the idea of, so if the care partner is out of the house or working, and one second, let me just read this. Can expose my little. Right. So it's definitely like the care partner is forced to think about, prioritize. So for example, let's say you really need to get to the grocery store, or, you also have to work from home. That poses a lot of like issues with balance. And I want to make sure that my loved one stays safe. And, you know, I think it just makes you think of kind of not being so hard on yourself, because yes, you do have to run out to the grocery store, or you do have to work from home. And this is something that, you know, you don't have a choice about, but you also have to watch your loved one. I think it can just pose a difficult balance of how to keep them safe, but also, you know, fulfill your own needs. So I just think it goes back to the idea of like recognizing that, you know, we're not all perfect. We have to do what feels right to us. We all know our own situation, our own circumstances. Think about how else I can, you know, and like the balance of knowing, you know, is it safe to leave depending on, you know, their level of impairment, or if we're concerned about falls, you know, could they sit in the room next to me while I'm doing my work over here? Or if I go out to the grocery store, maybe we can look into a fall alert bracelet so that I don't feel as concerned. I mean, there's certain strategies that you can consider so that you can fulfill your own needs while also keeping your loved ones safe.
This is to the group. Feel free to put into the chat. I know we have a lot of innovative people in our group and good troubleshooters. If there's any specific strategies that anyone here has been using to stay engaged, you can just type it in the chat, because I know you can't speak outright, and I can translate for you. I know, touching a little bit on what you just spoke about, that
Sure.
we had a Nest camera set up that I could check in
Great idea.
anytime I wanted to from the app on my phone. Now, there are privacy issues, because I could
Yeah.
also, when care was being provided, and we discussed that with our person, and he was okay with it, because he was having a little bit of some delusions and some paranoia, and making statements that things were happening that we knew based on what we saw on the camera, those things weren't happening. And so I explained to Papa that those things were happening during care, and that I would respect his privacy, and only I would be checking in on it. But we would at least be able to review the tapes if there were any questions. And so that served two purposes for us. One was we could monitor any concerns or complaints that he brought to our attention. And the other was that I knew I could be at ease. I could just pop in real quick when I had a break and make sure everything was going okay.
And it sounds like in that scenario, it's reassuring to both, you know, your father-in-law and yourself, because he knows that you're, you know, your eyes are on him, and that you're, you know, you're looking out for him, but also that you can feel at ease that he's safe. So I think that's a great idea.
It worked for us. It was a blessing.
Yeah. It's a really good idea.
Kim, did you have something to say?
Yeah, I just was going to share, you know, obviously our mother has been gone now since long before the pandemic started, but in our discussions, once this all hit, one of the things we said was, could you imagine if Mom was still here and we had to all now try to figure out, how are we going to manage this? How are we going to possibly be out of the house to if we had to work on site, which fortunately we've been remote for the past year, but what if we get called back to work? She's in a weakened condition. We can't expose her. Do we want to bring in a caregiver that we don't know what they're doing in their personal time? It would have been a whole additional level of stress put on us. And, you know, I give the people today that are dealing with this, I give them a lot of credit, because it's not an easy situation to be in under normal conditions. But now when you add this new element to it, plus now if you are working from home and you're the caregiver, you now are working from home, maybe educating your children, acting as a care partner, you're wearing so many different hats during the day.
Absolutely.
You know, I really give everyone dealing with this a lot of credit, you know, and of course you want the best for your loved one. Do I continue to put them out there in a clinical trial, knowing they're going to have to leave the house and potentially be exposed? Do I take them in for their different therapies? Do I have somebody come in? Again, not knowing what anybody else is doing. It's
It's a real dilemma. I
It
completely agree
really,
with
it
you.
is.
Yeah.
It truly is. You know, the one thing, and this is not necessarily MSA related, but our mother's younger sister was in a facility. We used to go up to see her once a year. She was in Massachusetts, and we couldn't for a year. And we had concerns. Again, you don't know staff. Are they potentially bringing something back that could get her sick? So if there's people who have a loved one in a facility right now, there's that level of concern. You know, the one thing that we did take comfort in is, in lieu of our in-person visits, that we did Zoom meetings with her every weekend so that we were able to still see her, interact, keep her spirits up. So it alleviated our stress because we could see she was doing well and everything was functioning as normal, or as normal as possible for her. And so that the Zoom was really helpful on both sides. So if there's ways to stay connected with people through technology, it's very useful.
I totally agree, Kim. And actually, it just makes me think of my experience when I was a social worker in the facility during COVID. It was extremely challenging. And a big part of my role during that time was actually connecting patients or residents with their loved ones, with their family members. So I was the one taking the Zoom, taking the iPad into the rooms and wearing my whole getup, my PPE. And I was, coming in with animation and making sure that people felt really, important and like they mattered. And then I was bringing in sometimes we had like birthday parties during COVID over FaceTime. We had, unfortunately, goodbyes. And truly having that iPad, having an ability to connect was so important. So I can understand, having that experience. I also know that the patients or the residents that were there, they really relied on their family members to be their advocates. And, when they didn't have that, so when there weren't patients or families with family members, kind of that was my role as a social worker, to be their advocate. And that became even more necessary when family members couldn't visit.
Yeah.
So,
and I can imagine that would be so stressful on both sides of the fence again. Like, you as the patient know that, hey, it's my daughter, my spouse that is always here advocating, taking care of things.
Totally.
Now what? And then as the person who was always doing it, you're relying on a stretched thin staff to, keep you filled in, to, help you manage your anxieties, your fears. So it's a very difficult situation for everyone involved. And with MSA in particular, another challenge is, there's communication issues. As the disease progresses, oftentimes people have speech issues and they're not as understandable. So when you're home and in person, maybe you can communicate, you really can focus in on the nuances of their communication. But when you're doing it via Zoom, it becomes a little more complicated. And then if you have like a social worker who's there trying to help, they're not really sure what the person's trying to say, maybe, or how to interpret or read what they're communicating. And again, another level of frustration. It's again, very challenging times. And I'm really hoping that there is that light at the end of the tunnel moving forward, and we will have some semblance of a normal
I agree.
scenario again soon for everyone. I mean, I think everybody is just fatigued now.
I agree. Totally. And, you mentioned that even when there are speech impairments and people have really a lot of difficulty and feeling frustrated, not being able to get out what they want to say, how frustrating that is. I think in those moments, it's really just about being there and kind of making sure the person feels cared for, like they matter. And I don't know, just heard. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
that they're seen, they're heard, and you're with them, you're there to support them. So kind of giving that, making sure that that's known.
Yeah.
But I think
there's a community that's already to some degree invisible because of the nature of the disease, it being a rare disease.
Right.
And now during a pandemic that's taking everybody's focus, I think it's easier now more than ever to feel into, to slip into a deeper level of invisibility.
Sure.
And it's human nature for everyone to feel cared for and that they matter. And in some ways, the pandemic isolated everyone so much that they lost the connection.
Yeah.
So, and that's true, but here's the takeaway that I have been focusing on or choosing to focus on this past year. This timeout is what I've been calling it, has really allowed me to redirect my priorities and focus on what's really important. And I've, that connection to people and knowing that I have my friends and my family and making that more of a priority and more of a focus than being pulled in a million different directions, work or this or that. It's kind of forced a slowdown in my life. And sometimes you don't realize you need it until all of a sudden you have it. So I've kind of am choosing to focus on the positive aspects, that I'm not always go, 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 go. I'm able to just sit back and say, okay, I'm gonna have some time. I'm gonna carve out time to spend with my sister or my brother. I'm going to take an hour for me just to do something I want to do. I'm gonna focus on something I've been neglecting, maybe around the house or something. So I've been trying to look at what this has brought to my life, where it's enhanced my life.
And I think what you're speaking to, Kim, is the silver lining, right? Is it kind of, we can all kind of find our own silver linings to the pandemic. I know it can be tricky, but that's why I brought up the whole gratitude practice. Because I think, when you think about what you're grateful for, it can even be, the sheets on your bed. It can be, the fact that it was a sunny day out today, or that you had a really good meal. It can be something so simple, but the things that you just maybe overlook and realize just how much they, bring added value to your life.
That is 100% true. There is nothing better than the feeling of getting into a clean bed.
Yes.
That is one of my,
I would agree.
That is one of my positives. There is just, I love that feeling of freshly clean bed, getting into it and clean pajamas and just, it's
Renewed.
the little things.
It is.
Yes.
Well, even when I was sick after my vaccination, it was far better to be in my own bed, in my own home with my cat and my dog and my husband than when I was in the hospital for 10 days. And it's all about perspective. I may never have embraced a vaccine reaction in the past. I certainly embraced it this time.
It's true. It's like I said, you find that positive, that this is so much better than blah, blah, blah.
I was so grateful for my bed. This past experience, I loved it. I said, I'm just so happy to be in my bed, home
I
and
don't care
comfortable.
how I feel. I'm just so glad to be here.
Right.
I will say that, it's important to be, to think about the positives and be grateful, but I don't want that to make you feel like you have to be positive all the time. That's something known as toxic positivity, I believe. And it's the idea that, you can embrace those times when you're feeling really down. Because if we don't recognize or acknowledge that we're feeling down and just kind of put it aside, you might feel invalidated. So I think that's just another way to view it. It's okay to have those moments of feeling down, but then, pushing yourself to get out of it, right? Not lasting so long. So I guess my whole take, especially as a social worker, is just being able to validate when people are not always feeling positive, because it's not realistic, especially in this time.
I think that just ties into the whole idea that you can't really know happiness unless you've known sadness, and vice versa. Having one makes you understand the other better, appreciate the other better. So.
And Lauren, I really appreciated your point you made about the cognitive behavioral therapy, because I'll be honest, quite a few years ago, maybe 7 years ago, I had a sick child, and it was a physical illness, and they kept saying he needed therapy, to go to cognitive behavioral therapy. And it was almost insulting, because I felt like it was dismissing the physical problems he was having.
Sure.
And your explanation, if someone presented it that way for me 6 years ago, I probably would have been all in, like, let's see what benefits we can get from it. But instead of feeling the situation was kind of being dismissed. So that was, I want to thank you for that awesome clarification. I never heard anyone present it that way.
I think what you're speaking to is that, sometimes people can make you feel like your thoughts like there's something wrong with you. The social work model is it's not what is wrong with you, it's what happened to you, and thinking about kind of what are the maybe things outside, maybe in your environment, like having a sick child, that are affecting you to feel that way. But then how can we then take a step back and change our perspective so that we start to feel better? So I just think it's not to invalidate your experience.
Mhm. Yeah.
I'm glad that was helpful for you.
It probably would have benefited my father-in-law also to to have a reframing and to
Sure.
have that part of his therapy, but it wasn't.
I also like with CBT, it doesn't, I mean, you could do it in a structured therapy session, or I think it's like an 8-week or a 6-week session. Or it could just be like taking those ideas and
Yeah.
kind of incorporating those ideas into your life,
Yep.
which is a little bit more approachable, I think.
Yeah, less threatening.
Yes, yeah.
Lauren, the information was wonderful and the conversation following was just as good. We really
Thank
appreciate
you.
being here.
Same here.
Yes, Lauren, I want to thank you on behalf of MSANJ. We welcome you to come back and speak anytime you're available and would like to. This was fabulous. You and Joellen really brought some great ideas to light. So thank you very much. And I hope our attendees, as quiet as they were, I hope that they got a lot of good takeaways from both sessions today. So thank you again.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely.
pleasure.
You are welcome anytime. We will talk. And Margaret,
Sounds
thank
great.
you for jumping in and moderating today. You did a fabulous job as always.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your weekend and stay tuned. Our next support group is coming up on April 10th at 11 a.m. So if anyone is interested, just shoot an email to contact@msanj.org. Thanks, everyone.
Great. Thanks, Kim. Thanks, Margaret.
Thank you.
Take
Bye-bye.
care.
Bye.